Hello, everyone. It's me, Candace, with Tubby and Coos Mid-City Bookshop, coming at you live from the bookstore with tonight's author event. I'm really excited about this event because I'm a big fan of both of these authors. So I'm really excited that we're able to bring you this conversation to celebrate Brom's newest book called Slewfoot. And so we are here with Brom. Over the past few decades, acclaimed dark fantasy artist Brom has lent his distinctive vision to all facets of the creative industries, from novels to games, comics, and film. He's the author of The Child Thief, Krampus, The Lost Gods, and I know all of you have bought those books, and the award-winning illustrated horror novels, The Plucker and Devil's Rose. Brom is currently kept in a dank cellar just outside of Seattle. And Slewfoot is so good, and the illustrations are amazing, as always. I'm so excited for y'all to get to read it. And Brom will be in conversation with Alexis Henderson, who is a speculative fiction writer with a penchant for dark fantasy, witchcraft, and cosmic horror. She grew up in one of America's most haunted cities, Savannah, Georgia, which I appreciate because New Orleans is pretty haunted as well. And that instilled in her a lifelong love of ghost stories. Currently, she resides in Columbus, Ohio, where she's learning to cope with the cold. And I'm very excited to have both of you here. Thank you so much for doing this event with us.
Great.
And I'm going to go away and listen.
Thank you so much, Candace, and thank you to Tubby and Coos for having us. And I'd like to give a big thank you to Alexis for joining me here. I have been fortunate enough to be reading her debut novel, The Year of the Witching. And a couple things I wanted to say really quick. I have not finished. I have a couple of paragraphs left, and I was sent 4 books to read this week for my virtual tour. And I got toward the end of this, and I was like, I have to speed read this so I know everything about it. But this book was so good, I could not do that. I just was sucked in, and I really want to savor these last pages. But that said, I can't wait to get back to it. But what I want to say is your narrative just sucked me in right away. I feel your work is chilling, it's tense, it's atmospheric, but most of all, you set up an interesting world and characters that I want to know more about. Like I'm set for a couple books in this world. So that said, I would love to hear a bit more about it from you, please.
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, I absolutely love Slewfoot, and it's just a huge honor to be here. I was just telling Brom that I'm a big fan of his work. When I was quite a bit younger, young teen, I would look online at his beautiful illustrations, and I was and am awed by you and your work. And so it's a huge honor to be here today. I wrote The Year of the Witching, which is my debut novel. And it's a dark fantasy that follows my main character, Emmanuel. She's a shepherdess who grew up in a theocratic society that's ruled by this tyrannical prophet, bad dude. And one day she's lured into the forbidden forest that surrounds her home. And there she encounters the spirits of 4 dead witches, and they reveal dark secrets about her past, her mother, and the church. And they sort of just upend her life in a very dark way. I'll read an excerpt. I'm just going to read, I guess, the first page or so. I'll read the first page-ish. Okay. The Beast. She was born breech in the deep of night. The midwife, Martha, had to seize her by the ankles and drag her from the womb. She slipped out easy, dropped limp into Martha's arms, and lay still as stone. The midwife's daughter gave a low groan that bubbled up from her belly. She grasped at the folds of her nightdress, its hem soaked black with blood, but she made no move to reach for her child. Instead, she turned her head, cheek pressed to the tabletop, and stared across the kitchen to the window above the sink, gazing into the woods. Her name, she demanded, eyes sharp with moonlight. Give me her name. The midwife took the babe, cut her cord, and swaddled it in a scrap of burlap. The child was cold against her breast, and she would have thought her dead if it weren't for the name that rattled at the back of her throat. Its flavor bitter as bile, and yet sweet as wine. The taste of the name the father had chosen for her. But she didn't want to say it, not out loud. With the last of her strength, the girl twisted to face her. The name, I want her name. Emmanuel, she finally bit it out like a curse. She will be called Emmanuel. At that, the girl on the table smiled, blue lips stretching taut. Then she laughed, an ugly, gargling sound that echoed through the kitchen, spilling out to the parlor where the rest of the family sat waiting, listening. A curse, she whispered, still smiling to herself. A little curse, just as she said, just as she told me. The midwife clutched the child close, locking her fingers to still their shaking. She gazed down at her daughter, lying limp on the table, a dark pool of blood between her thighs. Just as who told you? The woman in the woods, the dying girl whispered, barely breathing. The witch, the beast.
So good. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
You know, as you know, I illustrate my own novels, and for me, it's a joy to create something and then come to life in my head and then bring it to life through painting. And I have to say, while reading your book, especially the description of the witches, so inspired me. I want to paint your witches so bad. They just sound so creepy and cool.
Oh no, I just thought of anything in my life. Like I would, my hands are shaking at the thought.
Really wonderful character descriptions. Another thing I want to say while I'm embarrassing you and making you feel awkward here is I can't believe it's a debut novel. And I say that because your prose is just so clear and vivid. To me, one of my tests of good writing, at least for myself, you know, sometimes people will talk about how beautifully a book is written, but for me, it's how quickly the words disappear and the scene appears. To me, that's writing at its best. So I'm no longer paying attention to the author or the structure. It's just I'm seeing it, and you just, I don't know. Actually, this leads to a question. Are you self-taught? I mean, how did you learn to write with such skill?
Oh, thank you so much. That's really kind. I am kind of self-taught, kind of not. So I was homeschooled from first grade all the way to my senior year of high school. And in lieu of like a traditional English education, my mom taught me all the basic stuff, nouns, adverbs, adjectives, how commas work. But I hit about 8th or 9th grade and I started writing novels. And my mom was like, in lieu of like, you know, English, I had to read books still, which, you know, but in lieu of like writing essays and stuff, my mom pretty much just let me work on my novel. And so being a homeschool kid with not a ton of friends, I had all of this time to write and to read. I read a lot of classics and also hung out on the internet a lot, which is where I like you know, your work and your paintings. And I would just like, I remember like being a kid and just like devouring everything, like figuring out that fantasy was a thing and just being so hungry for it. Like almost this feeling of like, I belonged in the worlds, that like these fantasy worlds. Like I wasn't meant for this. I was meant for, you know, having a sword in my hand and like running through across the moors or something like that. So, and when I'm writing, I'm always, I think, fighting to get back to that really pure state where I was like, you know, 13 and I didn't know what good writing was. I was just like telling a story to myself. And then later on, I think, you know, I tried to kind of tune my ear to what I like to read. And there's a lot of emulation that goes on before I was able to kind of hopefully find a voice that's my own. So
No, that sounds, you know, so classic. There's so many creatives, the people that are just have a passion that's born in them. You know, nobody made you go to class or anything. It's just, you couldn't keep you from writing or painting or so on and so forth. It's funny you mentioned like you were just, you know, you were writing as a child and so forth. I mean, for me, even my youngest memories, even when I was 6 years old, was, you know, I would have my notebook paper and I'd draw my monsters and I'd write a little story under each page, and then I would staple it all together and I'd make these books. And there was such a joy to making those books. And I feel like it's, you know, I feel very lucky that that's basically what I'm doing now. I paint my little pictures and write the words and then, you know, put it all together. So I can completely relate to that. The cover is really, really stunning. I think they did a great job with that. Is that's not you, is it? Is that you?
No, but thank you. I'm very flattered. Thank you. It's a model from the UK.
Oh, okay.
He's close to Emmanuel's age, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Now, I read that there's a sequel in the works. This is going to be a trilogy or an ongoing series?
Yes, there's a sequel in the works. It's been in the works for a very long time. It is the hardest thing that I have ever attempted to write. I have scrapped it and restarted so many times. I realized that like writing a sequel is like such a different beast than just writing a regular book. It was just something I didn't go into it understanding.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's why part of the reason why my book 2 has been kind of delayed is me figuring that out. And I'm working on something else on the side while I figure out where this story is going and who my characters are going to be. But I do look forward to the challenge. I just hope that I can nail it down, to be honest. Like there's times where I'm just like, I will never be able to do it. Like I feel like I can't. But I think you keep feeling called back to certain worlds, certain characters. And I think some things just take time. So
it actually makes me feel good a little bit hearing that, because I've never written a sequel. I'm tempting, but I get it totally. You know, with my books, I really felt like I said what I really wanted to say in the first book. And how do I make a second book without repeating the first book? So I sympathize. Yes.
So hard. I could definitely like. I can see how like difficult, because I feel like your world when I'm reading Sleuthfoot, it's just so. It's so full and complete, and it feels like perfect. I'm almost to the end, but it feels like so complete and perfect. And I think that's like in the future. I think I really want to strive for that. I love a standalone novel, but I'm also in awe of like the George R. R. Martins who can just like write whole like chronicles, and they have like not only the series but like you know a whole history worth of books that happens before that even yeah. But it's so hard. I don't know.
I still want to know if Hodor was just an accident or if he planned it the whole way, right?
If he planned that, I would, yeah. I suspect he did. I feel like it's almost like the sequel writers and the series writers, it's almost like they have this world and it's just like, it's in their head complete. And sometimes I feel like they're almost like reporting on it. Like, and the force of that kind of imaginative power is just something that hats off. That's amazing.
So one of the things I feel like, more than just a synopsis about a story, how people really get to know what an author's trying to do with the story is the inspiration behind it. What's the inspiration behind this? What things led you to write The Year of the Witching?
So when I was, I mentioned that I was homeschooled. And during the time that I was homeschooled, around like, actually it was around like 13ish. It's a very like core part of my life, I guess. Like 12 to 13 was a big period of time for me. I was like briefly involved in like a fundamentalist Christian cult that is like since dissolved and dispersed into smaller different cults, you know, the way that they do. And so that really inspired a lot of like, I guess like the religious angst. That's in The Year of the Witching. Emmanuel's journey and her kind of crisis with faith was something that I kind of lived through, you know, around the same age that she did. And that was like the direct inspiration for like the evil prophet and all of that. The witchcraft was, it came from kind of my own curiosity. I read Witch of Blackbird Pond when I was quite young. And witches were always these like forbidden, dark things. And I think when I was in the cult especially, it was interesting how like the more involved in Christianity I became, the more curious I became about the occult and the dark things. So that was kind of like the direct inspiration to this, like feeling like you should be on this pious path, but having this like insatiable curiosity for everything that's dark and very much not pious. Yeah.
And it's amazing how having a little bit of firsthand experience can just make all the difference. And that probably has a lot to do with why that book feels so real and sucks you in so much.
Thank you. Yeah. It was hard at times. I think I was going to actually ask you this question because it's like, you know, in our work, like wading into the darkness and seeing ourselves in the characters we write, like as, you know, authors do, but putting them through really dark things, it takes its toll. And I was curious about like your experiences with that too, is like kind of like balancing that or how or like does it take its kind of toll because your characters go through some pretty like horrific dark things. And I always wonder like how much does that get into your head as you're writing, because for me it's hard at times.
It's me and Christopher Bielman were having this conversation yesterday, and for me and a lot of writing is acting. I'm that character while I'm writing it. And if you have a scene where maybe it's just a chapter and it takes the reader, you know, half an hour to read, but it's about somebody going through a torment. But as the writer, you might live with that chapter for a week and you're in that place. And we were talking about the difficulties of writing horror, especially during COVID, and with being isolated and dealing with so much darkness in the world. Christopher luckily was writing a somewhat satirical fantasy, so he was glad he wasn't in the horror genre. But when you write, do you feel like you're acting like you're role playing the character? Or are you a bit detached from it, or how?
I feel like my character's holding my hand, or like maybe kind of like linking pinkies with me, and they're kind of weaving through their world, and I'm kind of trailing after, like assessing it. But I do feel, I think, a lot of the anxiety. What about you? Does it feel like really like visceral to you, like as if you're living it yourself? Like,
oh yes, totally. I mean, what was the phrase Christopher coined? He said it. Method writing, like a method actor. I try so hard to be that character, and it might perhaps have something to do with why the monsters in my stories tend to be, sympathetic. Because when I'm writing the monster, I want to know what it's like to be that monster. Why is the monster doing the things it does? It's so rare that any entity thinks of itself as evil. Lions kill deer because they need to eat them. Monsters, vampires drink humans' blood because they have to. So that's where my mind tends to go. It's what would it be like to be those characters?
I really could feel that while reading. Like, Abatha, her internalization and the way that I felt like I was living every moment with her as I was reading, it feels so close, like so much more so than other books that I've read. And those are great books too, but like I love how so firmly rooted I felt in her perspective. And actually, like all of the different perspectives in your book, hers just comes to mind because she's the star, but like whatever perspective I'm reading from, when there's a change of perspective in your book, like I'm there. Like, I mean, I don't need a transition period, and I think you just excelled in that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, since we're on the subject, I'll give a little background to Slewfoot for everybody here. Slewfoot is essentially a historical horror novel set in colonial America in the 1600s. It's about what happens when a very spirited young woman with a pagan upbringing is essentially sold off to be married into the Puritan colonies. And this is something that really happened. There was a need for brides in the colonies at that time. It follows her journey as she's trying to navigate, basically a treacherous and unforgiving society that's bent on finding witches and devils under every rock. So then enter into this story, the devil. In this case, is an ancient forest spirit trying to find his role in the new world. And that's pretty much the setup for the book. But beyond the setup, as I was saying before, I often feel the author's inspiration tells so much more about the story we're trying to tell. And in this case, a couple different things. The primary inspiration was Arthur Miller's The Crucible, both the play and the movie with Daniel Day-Lewis. Every time I see that movie, I just think, oh, how cool would it be if those accused of witchcraft were actually witches? That's the story I want to see. I was also watching a lot of documentaries on the Salem witch trials, and the same thing came to mind. These poor people that are getting put through this, if they but really had witchcraft, that would turn things on their head. The other inspiration was Robert Eggers' The Witch. And as so many people, I love that movie, the atmosphere, the tone of it. And that movie, part of what was so great about that movie is it was based on a long line of witch mythology, and it did it right. They did their research. But when I watched that, I wanted to know that story from the devil's point of view. We got her point of view, but I wanted the devil's point of view. So that combined, with The Crucible was where I started on this. I wanted to take those and give you a little bit of insight from the devil's point of view, as well as what I'd like to, to really be a witch in that situation. But then an interesting thing happened, and this is, I feel, one of the joys of writing is when you set off on a path, but you discover something that sends you down another path. In this case, when I started doing my research, being a historical novel, I really wanted to get things right. And one of the things I noticed right off was that widows tended to be accused of witchcraft, more than, not just women, but widows were so often the ones, more so than anybody else, accused of witchcraft. And it was like, why was that? And in Puritan society, women were not allowed to have any ownership of, land, business, anything. They weren't allowed to be involved in business or government. They weren't even allowed to speak about these things. They were not allowed to talk back to men unless they were spoken to. So, obviously they're second-class citizens on so many levels, but there's one exception to this, and that's if their husbands were to die and they're widowed. Once they're widows, they are, by the law, by the canon of the Puritans, are supposed to represent their husband's wishes, the best that they can. So in this one circumstance, they're suddenly the equals of any man. So I can only imagine, the challenge that would be and the problems that might come up in a society like that. So in this case, if we have Abatha, who's, again, like I said, had a pagan upbringing, and she's struggling to fit in this society to begin with. And very early on in the book, her husband passes, and she's put in that situation. So to me, that was gold. That sort of just set the tone for the whole book.
It is absolutely fantastic. And I feel like I love this book so much because you can tell that you really, really did your research and you got it right. And it's such like a deep and I think accurate look into like Puritan society. And I love the way that, you approach it both from like the historical reality, which is like a lot of what the witch trials and stuff like that. A lot of those were kind of like rooted in like the politics of the time and like seizing property and stuff. But you marry it with magic, and I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. And I would love to know like a little bit more about like how you researched. Like, did you go there? Were there any books that you read? I know that you mentioned like the Crucible and the Witch, but like, what else? What other resources did you use?
I did. I mean, the first thing, I can't imagine how people wrote before the internet. I can't tell you how many times, I have to stop and go to Wikipedia or somewhere and just the most basic things. One of the things I found out quickly is there wasn't a form of currency, a dependable currency during this time. And they actually relied on wampum, which is this milled shell that the Native Americans produce. And so it's like, suddenly I have to know a lot about wampum. And on a side note, what's funny is they because this was the only dependable currency, people were using it. But at some point, the French figured out that instead of working really hard to earn wampum, it was easier to work really hard to make wampum. And they quickly flooded the market with wampum, and then wampum lost its value. But anyway, I digress. And that's part of what's fun about doing the research is you find these little tidbits that you wouldn't normally know about. But so for me, the internet is where you go first, and then there are certain things you need to do a deeper dive, and that's where I order books and go to the library. But I really enjoyed the research. How about you? Do you enjoy the research side of it, or where are your resources?
I do, but I feel like I love the research part. I love and then riffing on the research, or I could just be a little bit lazy when it comes to like historical accuracy, which is why I think I said, The Year of the Witching is second world fantasy. Because I just kind of like, I don't know, it's like the story was kind of getting beyond me. But yeah, I like this brings me to another question I have for you. I like my favorite part of the research was actually like researching like the occult as part of, building my magic system and like paganism and myth, and folklore. And your book really inspired me to like look up kind of more myths that I wasn't even familiar with. I was like, I was Googling like Slewfoot today, and I was like, I wanted to know like how much of your magic system is based in like folklore, and then and what was the process of like taking those kind of myths and folklore and making them your own and building your magic system, because it's such a good magic system. It's like, it's this like pagan folk magic at its absolute best. I love it. It's gruesome. It's gory. It's just so cool. And I really wanted to know, like, how did you go about the process of, building that?
Well, I am, full of mythical and magical powers, so I just draw. No, I'm joking.
Of course.
Yeah. Aren't we all? It's to your point of writing. There is the challenge. The historical part can be challenging. Sometimes it can be drudgery because you are so trapped with it. And my previous novels were all more mythology based, and there's to me a lot of joy in that, because as you know in your research, all the mythologies, there's so many different versions, and so many of these tales were handed down by word of mouth. So there's a lot of room and flexibility to expand them, to kind of make them your own. So with this novel, I think for the most part, I was trying to stick to so much of what you see in traditional witch mythology, and just try to put a little bit of a spin on it. I don't know. I guess that's the core of it there. You said you did a bit of research into cult. Do you meddle into the cult, or I guess what I'm asking is, does your research into Wicca and to such, has it attracted you into that, like from a religious level or a personal level?
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm not Wicca, but I do practice, I dabble. At first it was like, I'm really interested in tarot decks, and I just I want to see the art on the cards. It was kind of, innocent. And I was just kind of fascinated. So 5 decks later, I start to kind of try my hand at basic divination 101, learning more. And when I was writing The Year of the Witching, my dad actually accused me of bringing a demon into our house because I was dabbling around in spell work, probably a little recklessly, and things started flying off bookshelves. I had with no one in the room, crazy stuff, glass shattering. So there is this kind of hands-on element to my creative process. Is it the same with you? Do you ever dabble while you?
People are going to laugh. I am so superstitious, and I'm such a scaredy cat that my wife, who just loves all of this and has Ouija boards everywhere. I don't even want her to have a Ouija board shirt, because I'm no, if you touch it accidentally, you're going to conjure a demon. I have tons of animal skulls, but I have no real human skulls, because I feel like I'm just the ghost. It's going to float around the house at night and hover above my head when I wake up. So I have a lot of interest, and I do a lot of research, but I had just enough of a Southern Baptist upbringing that I believe in all religions. I believe they're all out to get me. I think maybe is a good way to put it.
No, I feel like I'm the same. I'm I do dabble, but only to a point. I get a little bit, I scare myself, and I feel like it almost doesn't make sense, how we can dwell as much in this kind of dark stuff. But if I'm creating it, it's one thing, but living it is, yeah.
So I have a couple of questions here I've written down that, we had an actual question come in. Let's see. Question from Blue Caldwell. Oh, hey, I know Blue. Hi, Blue. Let's see. I've ordered print versions of both of the books, but I listen to a lot of audiobooks. For each book, would you guys recommend reading it in one format versus the other? Alexis?
I love audiobooks, and I love print books. And I think that it really, to me, depends on the way that I want to read a story or want a story told to me. I feel I don't know, a way in here, but I almost feel when I listen to an audiobook, there's kind of this around a campfire telling each other horror stories vibe. And when I'm reading, sometimes it's I'm kind of, it's almost a closer form of reading where I'm kind of paying attention to every word and the paragraph structure and the way that it kind of even looks in the page a bit. So I think it's a matter of preference. But I would say I'm so happy about this one because the illustrations, and this is one of the most beautiful books I've ever.
Oh, thank you.
I feel honored to have it in my collection. So you made a good choice getting the print version of Sleuthfoot, and I'm sure the audiobook is amazing.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of audiobooks. When I paint, that's what I listen to. And for myself, it really depends on the reader. And and even within the reader, I've discovered there's essentially two kinds of readers. There's readers that are essentially a warm narrator reading a book to you, and then there's one where it's more as an somebody's acting the roles. And again, either can be great if the reader is good as the narrator is good. I feel I've been really lucky. I've had some brilliant narrators that bring it to life. But there is a little bit of a trade-off in when a narrator brings a bit of acting or dramatics to it. It's amazing how much just the tone of voice can completely change the meaning of a sentence or two. And there are times where there's something that I would have meant to be, commanding voice that could be in a very plaintive voice, and it completely changes the meaning. So there is that risk there. So yeah, but overall, I love audiobooks.
Yeah.
But I agree with your point too, though. When I read, when I have the time to read, I do love the ability to read a couple of paragraphs and just close my eyes and just imagine the scene and be there. So I guess it's trade-offs.
Yeah. Lately, I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks, but I think it's just I feel like being in the pandemic and being home alone, and I need to kind of hear human voices. So it's so nice to have the audiobook kind of playing and listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read that you paint. Do you draw and paint yourself?
I do, but not like you. I could only dream. But a little bit. I like to doodle.
Yeah. What kind of things do you like to paint or draw?
So
do you draw your characters from your books? Do you like to do that?
Okay, so I have a question for you about this, because I don't draw my characters. I draw characters that are only ever appear in my drawings. So little priests, they're always bald and they have tattoos on their faces.
Yeah.
I just draw them all the time. But when it comes to drawing my characters, I get so frustrated because every time I try to draw them, I look down at the page. I'm like, this is a stranger. I don't know who that is. It's not my characters. But with you, I was wondering, what is the process like? Do you see this character and then tell her story, or is it a situation where the story comes to you and you have to spend time to make the art look like what you see in your head?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, I've always written stories and drawn ever since a little kid. But for the first part of my career, I focused on my art. And then sometime in my late 20s, early 30s, I started to burn out a bit on painting. I was working with commissions, and often the commissions were wanting me to paint essentially paintings I'd already painted. And I had all these things in me I wanted to get out. So I returned to my love of writing. So my first books were, very heavily illustrated. There were paintings on one side and prose on the other. And I was relying very heavy on my artistic talent to tell the story. And those cases, those were stories that were, created around things I wanted to paint. And the characterization, a lot of the characters came even before the story was worked out. But as I got better with the writing, the writer in me wanted to prove that I could write something that would stand on prose alone. And at that point, it became much more about the idea and about, the story, how that would work. And the art became not necessarily secondary, but it did come second, is a good way to put it. But even that said, even in the most early stages of writing and conceptualizing, I would do just the rough sketches. And at times, it's almost like there's two separate people working. It sounds kind of strange, but the writer in me would craft a certain image and they would hand it over to the painter in me. And then the painter would take that and go farther, find things that the writer didn't even think about. And then that would go back into the story, and then stuff in the story would go in the writing. So I found a couple things. I found it was great to help create a full vision. But it was also helped from the point of view, if I started to get stuck or kind of burnt out with the writing, I could put that aside and paint for a while. And then the same thing, when I kind of I'm painting every day, I get back into the writing. So the two feed on each other is a good way to put it.
That is so amazing. That's one of the coolest story developing explanations I've ever heard. That is awesome. That is I'm just so in awe. The idea that you kind of like have a dialogue between these two sides of yourself.
Sometimes an argument even, the writer will want black fire and the painter's like, no, that's stupid. I'm not going to paint black fire. There are things that work in writing and the other way around. But
so cool. Do you have paintings where like you've wanted to tell the story in a novel? Like you paint something really, really cool and you're like, oh, maybe this could be novel material. Does it ever work that way as well?
Absolutely. And it's funny that you bring that up, because when I started, usually I wait till a book is done or almost done before I start the paintings. But with this Slewfoot, I had a really strong idea what I wanted to begin with. And I painted the painting you see, look this way, behind me. I painted that one first. And let me get this right. As you can see, it changed substantially because the character ended up being so different than what I initially was planning to do. And that's just discovering the character in the process of writing.
Wow. And when you're like visualizing a story, I kind of have questions too. If you're like a plotter or pantser, you like, I wing it. But like when you're visualizing a story, are you seeing it like the way that I'm seeing you right now, like kind of like real life, or do you almost imagine it as you would like visualizing a painting, like setting the scene of a painting? Is it in any way related?
Yeah, I think I tend to see it cinematically. I see the scene developing before me. Once I love the point where a character, when you finally know who the character is, and it's almost like they're on stage, and you can let them in some ways write the story for you. The situation happens, and it's almost like what they're going to say or answer to that. I asked you earlier, like if you role play or whatnot, but for you, is it cinematic or is it more, structured or?
It's a cinematic method. Like I feel like I'm following my characters and I see what they're seeing. And then sometimes things unfold in a way like, or I end up in a place I don't like and I backtrack and I have to and see it again. But I do, if it's going well, I definitely see it in a cinematic way. If not, it feels like kind of standing in an empty room and like moving a potted plant around and just trying to like, design or create something from the bottom up with my hands tied behind my back.
Yeah. Do you like to outline the story as much as possible before you start writing, or do you just kind of let the story evolve as you go, a combination of both?
I want to be an outliner really badly, so I think I always start out with an outline, and then there's like always a rabbit trail that like carries.
But that's cool though. I mean, I love that when suddenly you're like, oh, this is where it needs to go, right?
Well, it's fun. It's like it feels like I'm living the story. It's like an adventure. Because like if I don't know what's happening, it feels almost easier for me to get into the head of a character who also doesn't know what's happening.
Yeah.
Are you an outliner or are you a plotter? I couldn't tell. So I feel like sometimes I can read and I can tell. But and it's not even like in a bad or good way. It's just like sometimes you can almost like feel it. But I was wondering,
it's kind of like my writing. I mean, sorry, my painting. I'm not an academic in any way. I do just sort of. It seems to be different with every book. It seems to be different with every painting. As you said, I want to be an outliner because it just seems like a very efficient way to write, because I really hate when I spend 3 weeks writing this direction and I get to the point and I have to throw all that out because it's just not, and I think, God, that's 3 weeks of my life that nobody will ever see this or anything. And if I had just figured this point out B before C, I could have avoided that. So best intentions.
So I like hearing you talk about that. I'm curious, like, so you self-taught with writing and painting? Like what goes into the process of like you kind of like learning what works for you in both realms? And
yeah, definitely with the painting, I'm an Army brat, so I moved around a lot. Most of my family lives in the South, so we always came back home to Alabama, but it was always my friend, my art, and I never had any formal instruction. I was just looking at stuff I liked, and not until I worked for 4 years at a gaming company, TSR Dungeons and Dragons, and that was probably my biggest leap forward, because there were these professional artists, Clyde Caldwell, Jeff Easley, Fred Fields working there with me, and I could learn so much from them. You can learn more in a day watching a professional or talking to a professional than you can. But with the writing, the way I learned was writing really poorly and badly and spending way too much time doing it. And the first time I was working, a friend was helping me, a manager who was trying to help me get this story going, who liked my art and felt like, oh yeah, your art's really good, but we got to get your writing up. And I actually paid an editor to read it. And she said, you paint really well. Why do you want to do this? I mean, that's about how impressed she was. And then what I did is I went and bought a bunch of books on writing. I got audio books on little writing seminars, and I went to school. I just went to school. And I'm going to add one more thing, and I really want to get your take on this as well. But when I went from the illustrated novels to the prose, it was the same thing. I took this book around. It was The Child Thief, and several editors passed on it. It just wasn't there. But Diana Gill, my editor, she said, you've got something here, but you're going to have to put a lot of work into it. And she did the same thing. She put me through school. And I think what I'm coming all the way around to is I wrote a lot of bad before I was writing good. And if I was to give one bit of advice to my young self, it would be to write short stories and let people read them, because it would save, the mistakes I made, I seem to just repeat over and over and over. And if I could have just learned them in small short stories instead of novels, it would have saved me a lot of time. So all that said, how about you?
I absolutely agree with everything you said about short stories. I feel like in some ways, short stories are like almost harder than novels. And I feel like because of that, and because they don't take as long to write, they're the best way to cut your teeth as a writer. I just finished writing a short story. It took me a couple of months for an anthology, and I was remembering both why I love short stories, but also the grueling effort that goes into them, and how much of a good crash course they are, and a good confidence builder for that matter. Because at times when I was struggling to finish a novel, writing short stories really helped boost my confidence. It showed me how a story arc looks, even if it was a shorter one. So yeah, I absolutely think it's such a great way to learn, but also just being edited is so great. I learned so much from my editor, my past agent, just going through the ringer, and kind of emotionally, having someone I guess it's humbling, but it's kind of helpful, because I feel with edits, oftentimes I'm taken down to my lowest state, and then I'm having to build myself back up again along with the book. But it feels like a helpful hazing. I don't know. It's my editor's very kind. She's the nicest person ever. All my critique partners have been really kind, but it's painful to
it is.
Try to learn to be good at something.
I love my editors, Diana Gill on a couple of books, and Kelly Lonesome as well on this book. I don't always get along with art directors, because I really have a kind of a clear idea what I would do with painting, but I would be helpless without my editors. But I agree with your point there. I've learned that when the book comes back after the editor goes through it, is to read it all and try not to have a reaction, because it's hard not to get defensive. Yeah, but I was trying to do this and this, but I set it aside and just let it all sit in. And there's never, in my experience, been a time when their advice wasn't dead on. It made a big difference in getting the book where it needed to go. So I feel like I've been really lucky with my editors, and I just couldn't imagine writing without one.
Yeah, me either. I don't even want to imagine. I feel it's just it's such a part. It's a part of the process, and I think I realized working with an editor, and also my critique partners before I'd ever even sold a book, that half of writing is learning how to take criticism and make it your own, and make something better from the criticism. Until you learn how to process edits and critiques and criticism, it's so hard to kind of be where you'd like to be. And so, learning that apart from just the writing part, that processing edits and all that is its own skill set, that changed the game for me. Yeah.
And I'm sure, people that have written a lot of books, they get into that groove better. But I think I entered, in a way, it was good that I was established as a painter, because I was used to having art directors critique my work and stuff. So it gave me a bit of a thicker skin. And I think also I was just felt like such a student. I was just so hungry for that feedback.
Yeah, it's like I feel like one thing that I always am reflecting on is like how much of a privilege it is to have anyone even pay enough attention to your work, give it a criticism. Like nobody has time, and like we're all like so stressed and we're so busy and there's so many things to read and write, and it's like, to me it's just such a great gift when my editor, her name's Jessica Wade, but like reads my work and then gives me feedback on it, because it means like somebody paid attention to me and somebody thought that my work was worth something and could be something bigger and greater than it was when I kind of imagined it, and that's like it's a big honor. Yeah.
Here's a question for you. How much of your self goes into your characters? How much of the characters are you, and how much of them are composites of people you know?
A lot of myself goes into, well, for Emmanuel especially, a lot. I don't think I will ever write a character that's like that close. I have, well, actually no, it's a lie. One other, and after that, I swear I'm done, because I feel like it's like it almost. I think that sometimes the line gets blurry between me and them, and when you're publishing things, it's like it's already exposing enough. And I think that when you put so much of yourself into a character and they're so similar, it's like kind of bearing your heart to strangers. And there's other characters where are optimistic facets of myself. Like I admire Ezra's like bravery, and his loyalty, and I hope that I would be that loyal or brave in his situation to like go against the flow. So I do put myself into the characters quite a bit. What about you?
It's like I was mentioned earlier. I try to role play each of those characters, and it's even the monster. It's like the monster version of me. And I'm currently working on a new novel, and there is a serial killer in there, and it's actually incredibly disturbing because I have to go into this guy's mind and be him, and it's not just him. It's like it's the serial killer I would be, and it's like, okay, I'm completely uncomfortable with this. But to be a good writer, you have to be willing to be that honest, to go to that place. But that's an extreme example. It's much more fun when I'm pretending to be, Krampus or Slewfoot or something. But yeah, I can't help but put quite a bit of myself into the characters. Both the positive and the flaws as well.
Is it scary for you to like embody the characters that much? Like, even apart from like the bad things I experience, like sometimes I find myself almost afraid that I'm like not losing my mind, but losing myself to the characters I'm putting myself in. And when I come back after a day of writing or a day of daydreaming, even, and I come back to myself, I feel, I don't know, like a little disconnected from who I am because I've spent time being someone else. Is it the same?
Yeah, absolutely. About how many hours do you usually write a day? Do you write at night, in the morning? I mean, do you put in a 15 hours at a time, or do you spread it out, or?
Whenever it comes to me. Lately, I've been writing on my phone.
Oh my God!
App, and I think people must think I'm texting all the time because I'm just sitting here, like wherever I am, typing into my Word document.
Right.
But when I'm on deadline, like right now, I try to just do like a chapter a day, which I mean, on a good day, that's 2,000 words worth of material. But on a bad day, it's 100 words. It's a sentence. So yeah. What about you?
Yeah, it's well, I'm actually very structured. It's funny. I'm a morning person. I get up and it annoys the hell out of my wife because she needs 3 cups of coffee in a couple of hours to get going. And I usually wake up I'll go to bed frustrated about something with a story, and I'll wake up in the morning going, oh, I got it. And I'm right at the keyboard, just going at it. So I write fairly structured. I actually, this is hilarious, but I have my lunch. I have to have my nap. And that kind of gets me going again for a couple of hours. And then around 4 o'clock, I'm done. It's just I might do some light editing, but yeah, that's where my biggest creativity comes from. Is writing.
And do you paint like in between, or do you follow the same, like kind of like a similar schedule, or is it?
It is, yeah, it's exactly the same. Yeah. It looks like we have a question that's come in from Jenna. What books have either of you read lately that you would recommend to your fans?
I have two. They're both horror and quite dark, and I'm so bad with names. I don't remember the author's name.
Oh, you sound like me. I'm the same way.
I You go first.
I'll give you a second. I highly recommend The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. I love all his books. And like Alexis, I'm having a brain bubble with some of the names, but Christopher is probably one of my favorite recent discoveries. I highly recommend this book. This one's awesome. So
thank you. I also recommend this one. I love it. I absolutely love it. The other one that was on my mind, I don't even have it on me right now. Let me pull up can I pull up the cover? Is it gonna load? It's Tender as the Flesh, by Augustina Bazterisa, I think. It's like a cannibalism dystopian. I don't know. Like a deadly virus has like infected all of the meat on Earth, and it's made it like poisonous. So people have they've turned to cannibalism as a means to have food. It is one of the darker things I've ever read. And the cover I think it's just so cool. I kind of wish it was just like a art piece, because I'd like to put that on my wall. It looks awesome. So yeah.
Another question for you: How has COVID affected your creativity?
Oh, man, I think it's been really rough. I feel like last year, like my creativity just like took a nosedive. I think in part, I don't want to, publishing has been like the biggest blessing and like of my life and a huge honor, but it was an adjustment for me, publishing my debut. And then I published it right in the smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. It published July of last year. So like both of those things, like I would just bounce back and forth, being anxious about the pandemic, anxious about the debut, and then it was just like a pinball machine. Like, yeah, and it was also weird because like my book is about plagues, and to be living a plague while marketing a book, I think I was just like, nobody wants to read this. I kind of felt like nobody really wanted to read horror at the time. I'm so happy I was wrong. Like, I remember Mexican Gothic was doing so well at that time, and I was just like, I'm fascinated by the way that when things are bad, like people turn toward dark fiction as a means of comfort.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. What about you? How has it been for you?
Not just myself, but universally, the creative people I know, it seems like, okay, we have to quarantine, we have to be in our own space. It seems like it's an ideal situation to kind of go within and be creative, but I've been surprised at how most of the creatives I know have hit walls, have had a difficulty being creative during this time. Yeah, I mean, on one hand, it's been really nice to try to, I think in the beginning of all of this, there's this need to feel like I can do something about it. And then towards the end, I've been learning to let go of the things I can't do anything about it. And I've been trying to get back into my art, like when I was a child, to let that be a place to escape. You were talking earlier about, just how when you did it just for fun, and so trying to not look at the darker side of social media as much, trying to put out some of the news, and try to find that space that art and writing has always, provided for me.
Yeah. I feel like it just becomes so precious when everything is so, I hate to say it, bad, but I mean bad, like having that means of solace. And then it's empowering in a world where we have so little control to be able to kind of create your own solace through art. Yeah. So I've been trying to do the same. I've been fighting for it. But it's hard.
So I've been asking the other writers a question, and if this is at all uncomfortable, don't answer it. But as we're wrapping up here, it's kind of, I ask a lot of my friends this, but if you had the ability to create your own afterlife, what is your ideal afterlife?
Oh my gosh, wait, this is such a great question. Okay, my own afterlife. I feel like I want like the aesthetic and vibes of like of the Gothic, like kind of like Crimson Peak-ish vibes, but with like medical technology that's well beyond where we are today, and no social media. I want the internet, but only the good parts. Like only like only the good parts of the internet, and maybe it's like all the tech devices look like, I don't know, mirrors or something, like touchscreen mirrors and stuff. So the technology, but yeah. And I think that in that world, I wish that like there was some way for us to all vote on everything.
Yeah.
And like every person has a vote about all of the major things. There's like no Congress or no president. And then everybody's right and everyone agrees with what I think.
Yeah. So your afterlife sounds almost like life. Like it's got technology and people are all affecting each other. And so you're not dead, you're kind of alive dead, maybe, right?
Right. Yeah, I feel like I kind of do want to be alive, but then sometimes when I'm really tired, I'm like, I just want to be reincarnated as like a jellyfish. I've known to say that a lot. So on a more stressful day, I'm like, I just want to be a jellyfish. I don't want to have any thoughts. I don't want to have a brain. I just want to kind of like bob along on the ocean. And
no, Nell, I mean, that's kind of my dream afterlife, that I'm just my consciousness like in a bubble, and I can just go back and forth in time. I can see where everything ends. I can go back and look at the dinosaurs. I can go to other planets. You know, you're just this little ball of energy that zips around. So I relate to the jellyfish.
I love that. No, yours is the best. I want to steal yours.
Okay.
Because I feel like it would satisfy my curiosity about everything. Like it makes me so mad sometimes when I think I'm not going to figure out how this ends. Like I'm not going to figure out when the aliens come unless they come in my lifetime. And it makes me almost furious that like I won't be here to see so much. So I really like that you can like explore but not have the stress.
Well, I think we're about wrapping up here. So Alexis, again, thank you so much for joining me. This has made this a lot of fun. And also thank you to Tubby and Kuz. This has been great. And for all the people that take the time to join us. And thank you, Candace.
Yes, thank y'all so much. And I agree with Brom about my afterlife. I've always thought about it, that I would be able to like cross time, space, and dimensions in wherever I go, and like shoot around and like see, I don't know, parallel universes, or like you're saying, other planets or whatever.
Well, it makes sense. We're all readers. We like books. In a way, that's what we're doing when reading, right?
Yeah, that's very true. But yes, thank y'all so much. I'm going to remind everyone again to, of course, buy books. That's why we're all here. You can buy books here. I have a bit.ly link. So it's just bit.ly/slewfootbrom. You can go to our website and just click place order as well. It's pretty easy. We have signed book plates from Brom. So thank you for doing that for us.
Oh, sure.
And so you'll get a signed book plate as well if you order from us. And thank y'all so much for doing this event. This was so cool, and it was so fun to listen to this conversation. And we're getting a lot of thank yous from comments as well. So thank y'all very much.
Thank you. This has been an absolute honor and pleasure. It's been so fun. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Brom and Candace.
And everybody have a good evening. We'll see y'all next time.
All right. Good night.
Bye.